Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're getting into the story of the Savage Nomads, a New York City street gang, right? Been around apparently for over 50 years.
Yeah, quite a long time. Our main source here is, well, it's a Wikipedia entry. Provides a kind of overview.
Exactly. And our goal really is just to unpack that, understand where they came from, what they were known for, and maybe, what their legacy is.
Sounds good. Where do we start? The beginning, I guess.
Let's do it. Okay, so the founding date jumps out immediately, August 5th, 1970.
Right, in the South Bronx. And founded by a guy named Benjamin Melendez, known as Yellow Benji.
Okay. And the source says they got pretty popular in the 70s, and that 50-year active span. That's quite something for a street gang, isn't it?
It really is. Longevity like that isn't always common. Things can be pretty volatile.
Absolutely. And who are the members? That early makeup is pretty interesting.
Yeah, the source mentions primarily Puerto Rican and African-American members.
Which sort of paints a picture of the South Bronx at that time. But it also mentions one teenage Jewish girl.
It does, which makes you wonder about the social glue, what brought this specific mix of people together?
Shared experiences, maybe? The environment? Hard to say from just this, but it's definitely food for thought.
For sure. Then we get these key figures mentioned. Melendez, the founder, obviously.
Right, Yellow Benji.
But then there's this other name, Benjamin Buxton, listed as Supreme President from 1952 to 2017.
Wait, 1952, that's well before the 1970 founding date.
Exactly. It's a bit of a head-scratcher. Was he involved earlier in some other capacity? Or maybe a leader in a different chapter?
Because they mention territory in the Bronx and Hartford, Connecticut?
Right. So maybe Buxton was tied to Hartford?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just an error in the source. It's unclear.
It really is one of those little details that makes you go, Okay, so what were they actually doing? The activities?
The entry mentions small crime activities. Pretty broad term.
Yeah. Small crime in the 70s South Bronx. Could mean a lot of things, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Petty theft, maybe low-level drug stuff. It doesn't specify. But it does mention rivals.
Okay, who were they up against?
The Seven Immortals, the Savage Skulls, and the Dirty Dozen. And it mentions running battles.
So not just occasional friction. Sounds like ongoing conflict, territorial stuff probably.
That would be the assumption, yeah. Intense competition for turf, maybe resources.
Now, this next part, it really stands out. The symbolism they use.
Yeah. The Nazi symbolism. Swastikas, Nazi helmets.
Even a position called the Gestapo within the gang.
Right. And it notes they weren't alone in this. The Savage Skulls apparently did something similar.
But why? I mean, especially given the main ethnic makeup, Puerto Rican, African American, it seems incredibly contradictory.
Well, the source suggests the reason was basically to project a menacing and terrible image. Shock value, essentially.
So using the most extreme symbols they could think of just to instill fear.
That seems to be the interpretation offered, yeah. Co-opting symbols of ultimate evil to make themselves seem dangerous. It's a really complex thing to unpack.
Definitely. The psychology behind that choice.
Wow.
It wasn't about ideology then, but purely about image projection.
Based on this source, yes. Using forbidden symbols as a weapon, almost.
Okay. Moving on slightly, the source does mention one specific serious crime.
Right. Iran Nazario. Convicted for a drive-by shooting and a firebombing. Got 27 years.
So while the overview says small crime, this incident shows there was potential for, very serious violence, too.
Exactly. It's a stark reminder that even if day-to-day stuff was small, the capacity for major harm was definitely there. It grounds the story a bit.
And how were they seen, publicly?
Well, interestingly, they were featured in a 1979 documentary called 80 Blocks from Tiffany's.
Oh, right. I've heard of that film. It was about South Bronx street gangs back then.
Yeah, a pretty significant piece of documentation from that era. So the fact that Savage Nomads were included suggests they were, visible. They had a presence.
It makes you wonder how they were portrayed in the film, what aspects the filmmakers focused on.
True. Documentaries always have a perspective, don't they? But it shows they were part of that landscape being documented.
Then the timeline jumps forward quite a bit. There's mention of a resurgence.
Yeah, in 2017. Apparently, members were released from prison, and the gang was linked to 2 homicides.
Wow, so decades later, after all that time.
It suggests these ties, these identities, maybe they don't just disappear. Release from prison can sometimes reactivate things.
And it brings up questions about, reintegration and what happens when long-term members get out. What are the conditions that might lead back to that life?
Exactly. It points to much bigger systemic issues, potentially, that cycle.
The entry also has those see also links, Universal Zulu Nation, Black Spades.
Right, which hints at a wider context, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How these groups might have interacted or influenced each other within that whole NYC scene.
Yeah, connections we don't really get details on here, but they're flagged. And the references listed, articles from the New York Times, Hartford Courant.
Which tells us there's more reporting out there,
Yeah.
different angles, probably different time periods covered in more detail. This entry is really just a starting point.
Sure. Okay, so let's try and pull the main threads together.
All right.
We've got the Savage Nomads, starting in the South Bronx, 1970. Founder, Yellow Benji Melendez.
A primarily Puerto Rican and African-American membership involved in small crime, but also serious violence and locked in rivalries.
The really striking use of Nazi symbolism, apparently for intimidation.
Their appearance in that key documentary, 80 Blocks from Tiffany's, giving them some visibility back in the day.
And then this reported resurgence much later in 2017, suggesting the story wasn't entirely over.
A long and complex history for one group.
Definitely. And maybe something for listeners to think about is, why those symbols? Why would Nazi imagery resonate even as just a tool for fear within communities that were themselves marginalized?
That's a deep question. And also, how does media like that documentary shape how we remember and understand groups like this decades later?
Yeah, and what does that potential resurgence tell us? About the individuals involved, sure, but also maybe about, the environments and lack of opportunities that might keep these cycles going.
Lots to consider there. It's never just a simple story, is it?
Never is. Well, that brings us to the end of this particular deep dive.
Indeed. A fascinating, if unsettling, look back.